My name was Rashid. I was a judge in my community, a position held with reverence, draped in the weight of tradition. At 45, I had become the embodiment of obedience, enforcing laws steeped in the rich soil of our culture. But inside, I felt a yawning emptiness, a chasm growing with each prayer that felt less like communion and more like ritual. I was respected, yes, but I was also isolated, silently questioning the faith that once colored my world vibrant. One fateful night changed everything. A tragic accident thrust me into the dark void between life and death. In that suspended reality, when shadows danced and time became irrelevant, a presence emerged, a blinding light cutting through the suffocating darkness. It called to me by name, resonating deep in my spirit, Rashid, and in that moment, I faced the most astounding revelation. I met Jesus. He didn't come to challenge my beliefs. He came to unravel the very fabric of my understanding. I was shown a spiritual war, a profound battle hidden beneath layers of human tradition and control. Behind our sacred texts, layers of truth and deception intertwined, held captive by fear and religious auras, shrouding the heart with silence. The fog lifted, and I realized I was not serving the divine. I was shackled by a system masking itself as faith. Awakening from that coma, I stepped back into a world that felt alien, a place where my newfound light was met with shadows of doubt and accusations of betrayal. My family, my community, both became barricades in my journey, reacting with fear towards the truth that had ignited a flame in my heart. Torn between duty and an urgent need to explore this new path, I ventured into the realm of the unknown, grasping for understanding and acceptance, even in the depths of loneliness. But what I discovered was not just a personal quest, it was a calling. My experience wasn't merely for me. It became a beacon for others trapped in darkness, still yearning for the light. As I lay there, the echoes of Jesus' voice rang in my ears, urging me to rise, to stand against the darkness, prepared to face the challenges that awaited me. When I finally opened my eyes, I was met with stark fluorescent lights and the sterile scent of a hospital room. It felt disorienting, as if I had stepped into a world that was completely alien. My heart raced as the memories of my encounter with Jesus flooded back. Every revelation, every truth unveiled. Yet, as I tried to voice those experiences, to share the newfound understanding that gripped my soul, I was met with hostility. Family members who once embraced me turned cold, labeling me a traitor. Their faces were twisted with disbelief and anger, the same faces that had conveyed love now shrouded in a veil of rejection. I found myself plunging deeper into an internal crisis, a profound solitude that echoed in the corners of my mind. I had awakened to a truth that shook the very foundations of who I thought I was, a truth that revealed the spiritual war raging beneath our lives, a battle for hearts and souls waged in darkness. I could feel the weight of their disdain gripping me, each word they hurled like stones, pushing me further into isolation. I desperately sought to understand the unseen barriers constructed by the elite, those who perpetuated a hidden agenda cloaked in the guise of piety. As I questioned everything around me, the familiar life I once knew slipped through my fingers like sand, leaving me rattled and racked with guilt. In the shadows of my mind, however, an awakening began to swell, a yearning to escape the confines of a system that thrived on our divisions. Each night, after the silence thickened and my family slept, I would steal away to secluded corners of my home, where I could explore Christianity. I dove into the scriptures, seeking the truth I had encountered in that ethereal moment with Jesus. I sought solace in the stories of love, compassion, and understanding, woven into the fabric of a faith that felt undeniably profound. Still, I couldn't shake the fear lingering deep within me, the fear of what my family would think if they discovered my secret. As I immersed myself in this new perspective, pieces began to fall into place. I witnessed the parallels between the struggles faced by my community and the narratives foretold in those ancient scriptures. The political battles that raged in the world, the manipulation of truth by leaders seeking power, it all began to make sense. I realized those in power, the elite who dictated the laws of our lives, thrived on deception, keeping people in ignorance to maintain control. I could feel the desperation of those still shackled by outdated beliefs weighing on my conscience. This was not just about me, it was about a collective awakening for those blinded by tradition. Though clarity washed over me, the fears of betrayal loomed heavily. My family's anger became a dark cloud, casting a shadow over this newfound light. I pondered the cost of my awakening. Could one truly call themselves a follower of Jesus while being confronted by the deep-rooted faith of their upbringing? The faith that echoed through my family's history, now seen through a lens of obligation rather than liberation. I felt trapped in a web of guilt and longing, battling between the love for those I had known all my life and the truth that beckoned me to a deeper understanding of existence. Day by day, the weight of that spiritual battle intensified, and the tension mounted. I found comfort in the quiet moments of prayer, where I sought guidance from the very source I had once known only in shadows. The spiritual war that raged within me became a clarion call to press forward, to share the truth I was coming to understand. With every revelation, the urgency grew stronger. A compulsion to stand against the tides of deception in a world that struggled for authenticity. Yet would I muster the strength to share this awakening, to challenge the voices of my family and the traditions that defined them? Only time would tell how this internal conflict would unfold, but as I stared into the abyss of what lay ahead, I knew that my path was irrevocably changing. In the days following my awakening, I found myself grappling with a tumultuous sea of conflicting emotions, a storm brewing within that felt unyielding. My heart longed for truth, yet I was acutely aware of the potential fallout of my newfound beliefs. I had tasted the sweetness of revelation, yet the bitter taste of fear gnawed at my insides. My family, once pillars of support, now felt like walls closing in around me, their anger and disbelief hammering into my spirit. The isolation became unbearable, awakening a profound need for answers that would steer me through this chaos. So I embarked on a quest, one that would lead me into the embrace of a clandestine community of Christians living just beneath the surface of my reality. With hesitant steps, I dove into this new world, where the stories shared felt like life buoys tossed in the tempest of my confusion. I met others who had been through their spiritual wars, each bearing witness to the truth they found in Jesus, each struggling with their own burdens. Their testimonies resonated with a familiar anguish, yet there was an undeniable spark of hope that ignited within me. I discovered the Bible, a text pulsing with the essence of the truth I so desperately sought. As I read passage after passage, I felt a peaceful warmth enveloping me, unlike anything I had ever experienced. This was a peace that transcended the fear that had gripped my heart for so long, a soft whisper inviting me deeper into this awakening. Yet, as I began to understand the narratives within the scriptures, a shadow of dread crossed my mind. What did this mean for my family and my culture? Could I truly embrace this new path when it meant turning my back on the traditions that had shaped my identity? I felt torn. With each moment of clarity, images flashed in my mind. My family, their disapproving gazes, and the potential of being ostracized, forever labeled an outcast. The deception woven through the fabric of our belief systems weighed heavy on my conscience. I realized how easily people could be led astray by the elite who manipulated us for their gain, using religion as a tool for control rather than liberation. The tension mounted as I immersed myself in this clandestine community, trying to foster connections while navigating the treacherous waters of my loyalties. I understood that I was carrying the burden not just of my beliefs, but of an awakening that demanded action. Here, in the warmth of fellowship, the truths I had encountered post-coma began to take shape, echoing the revelations I had witnessed in the light of Jesus. I felt an urgency arising within, urging me to stand against the hidden agendas that thrived on division and strife, to become a voice that would challenge the narrative spun to keep us in chains. The stakes felt overwhelming, and with them came an insatiable desire to share what I had learned. But with each heartbeat, I sensed the precarious nature of my situation. How could I bring light into such a complex darkness? As I shared glimpses of my experience with a few trusted souls in this community, I felt a flicker of courage ignite, the fire of awakening sparking with each shared story, each assurance that I was not alone in this battle. Yet, just as quickly as courage filled me, doubt and fear crept back in, whispering reminders of what I stood to lose. Would I be able to navigate the complex tapestry of family and faith that had once defined me while pursuing this new truth? As I journeyed further, the anxiety of revelation began to mix with an exhilarating sense of purpose. I had tasted the truth, and like a flame ignited, it demanded air to breathe. I needed to spread this awakening, even if it meant risking everything I had known. The spiritual war was no longer an abstract concept. It was alive within me, beckoning me to confront the deceptions I had once blindly accepted. I found myself at a crossroads, ready to step further into the light, knowing that every choice could lead me to salvation or to despair. The hour was drawing near for me to take a bold stand, and as the whispers of Jesus echoed in my heart, I felt the tension mount, urging me deeper into my quest for truth. As I stood at the crossroads of my awakening, the pulse of purpose surged within me, demanding to be recognized. I felt an undeniable compulsion to break the silence that had shackled me for so long. My experience, this divine calling, had illuminated the hidden truths that lay beneath the surface of our existence. But with that revelation came fear. Fear of the consequences that awaited me as I contemplated stepping forward, revealing the truths I had uncovered about the spiritual war raging within our society. I had tasted the profound peace that accompanied my new beliefs, but now I sensed the responsibility that hinged upon my shoulders. Each day was filled with tension as I struggled to reconcile my past with this newfound calling. I watched the world around me, my family, my community, reeling under the weight of deception perpetuated by those at the top. The elite had woven a web of manipulation and control, using religion as a means to disempower rather than uplift. The spiritual war was not fought merely in distant lands, but was present in the hearts and minds of individuals, including my own. I felt compelled to help others awaken, to breach the barriers of fear and tradition that held them captive. In the evenings, I sought solitude to gather my thoughts, often praying for guidance. I could feel Jesus' presence with me, urging me onward, allowing me to see glimpses of what was possible if I embraced this truth. I began drafting my thoughts, mapping out simply yet passionately what I wanted to share: stories of hope, revelations from the scriptures, and insights from my experiences. Each word became a stepping stone, nurturing a fire inside me, a fire that ignited a desire to speak out against the powerful forces perpetuating fear. However, the reality of potential loss loomed over me like a shadow. I considered the friendships that hung delicately in the balance, the relationships in my family that could fracture beyond repair. Having once been celebrated as a judge known for my fairness, I feared that stepping into my new role as a messenger of truth would be taken as an act of betrayal. But the urgency to awaken minds outweighed my distress. I realized that choosing silence meant letting those hidden agendas thrive unchecked. I could no longer tolerate a reality where deception dictated our beliefs and actions. The challenges ahead were daunting, but with every tear shed and every prayer spoken, my resolve deepened. I contemplated gatherings where I could share my journey openly, where others who had felt similarly could find their voices as well. Each step I envisioned brought me closer to the truth I had experienced with Jesus. I was prepared to connect with others who also trusted that their awakening could spark a movement, despite the elite's attempts to keep us divided. I was ready to embrace the calling, to stand against the overwhelming forces of deception, even if it meant risking relationships built on years of tradition. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I envisioned what lay ahead. The conversations, the challenges, and the connections that would fuel the awakening process within my community. I envisioned the support of my newfound family of believers, standing together in solidarity, refusing to back down against the tide of fear. The time for action was nearing, and my heart raced with anticipation and trepidation. Could I truly become the voice of truth in a world desperate for awakening? As I gathered my notes, I felt empowered, the fire of purpose burning bright within me, pushing me forward into the unknown. In a moment of profound clarity, the weight of my decision pressed down on me like a heavy shroud. Leaving everything behind, my home, my family, my identity, felt like stepping into the unknown. But the truth I had encountered during my near-death experience revealed that there had to be more than what I had been living. I was no longer willing to exist in the shadow of a hidden agenda that sought to control the very essence of my being. This spiritual war had taken root in my life, and it was time to fight back. I felt a surge of courage as I looked at the empty street, finally ready to embrace the path laid out before me, a path illuminated by my newfound faith in Jesus. As I forged ahead, the fear of suffering loomed large. I knew the stakes. It wasn't just about my comfort, but about my family's ties to tradition and expectations. Yet, deep in my heart, I craved freedom, a freedom that had eluded me for years. With every step I began to shed the past, like a snake sheds its skin. The identity I had worn for so long felt foreign, suffocating even. I adopted a new name, one that resonated with my soul's awakening. A name that symbolized not just a new beginning, but an act of rebellion against the deception I had come to recognize. Suddenly, the world around me felt vast and filled with possibility, and I knew I was walking toward a life that resonated with truth. Embracing this faith was not an easy journey. Each day presented its own challenges. Yet amid the trials, I discovered a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced before. Serving others became a part of my daily existence, and I found immense joy in sharing my story, in being a beacon of hope for those still ensnared in the darkness of manipulation. The more I spoke about my revelations, the corruption wielded by the elite, the false narratives that kept people divided, the more I felt the chains of my old life shatter. People began to gather, drawn by the authenticity of my message. I saw their eyes light up with understanding, their hearts beginning to awaken as they recognized the same truths I had uncovered. As I evangelized, the urgency of the spiritual war around us seeped deeper into my bones. I encountered faces of desperation, those burdened by the pressures of the world, hungry for the freedom I had found. They needed to hear the truth that Jesus carried in his heart, that they were meant for more than the lies spun by those in power. Each conversation became a revelation, not just for them, but for me as well. I realized that in sharing my journey, I was simultaneously healing. Every time I recounted my encounter with Jesus, Feeling His love wash over me again, I was reminded of the freedom that awaited anyone willing to embrace it. Yet within this newfound purpose, the remnants of my past clung tightly. I felt the pull of my family's rejection, the voices of dissent echoing in my mind. What would it mean for them to see me now, transformed and unrecognizable? The emotional turmoil within me grew heavier with each passing moment. Despite the joy of serving and sharing, there was an underlying fear of being completely cut off, a fear of losing the only semblance of belonging I had known. How could I communicate the depth of my transformation without igniting a conflict that could sever the fragile ties that still connected me to my roots? But as I pressed forward, drenched in the light of my awakening, I realized that the call of Jesus was stronger than any fear of loss. The truth demanded to be shared, and I felt the weight of that responsibility thrumming in my veins. It was a relentless urge, a prayer echoing within me, and I knew that the journey ahead was not merely personal. It was a movement, a collective shift toward awakening that reached far beyond my own story. I had become part of something greater, a force pushing against the tides of deception. The spiritual war was real, and now more than ever, I was determined to fight for the truth, not just for myself, but for all those still entangled in the shadows. Now that you've walked with me through the darkness and back into the light, I need to leave you with something to ponder. Have you felt that undeniable pull towards a truth that seems just beyond your reach? That echoing sense that this world is steeped in layers of deception and spiritual battles fighting for our very souls? Because make no mistake, there is something much larger than ourselves at play. In my glimpse beyond the veil, I realized that the fight isn't just for personal awakening. It's a collective awakening that has the power to shatter the chains of manipulation holding us all captive. We are all woven into a grand tapestry of existence, each thread representing a choice between darkness and light. The urgency I felt in that moment spent with Jesus cannot be overstated. We are being called to rise, to awaken, and to challenge the narratives that keep us divided. Will you heed that call? Now I want to hear your heart. Have you experienced a moment of clarity, a shift that challenged everything you thought to be true? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments. Each voice matters, and together we can forge a path toward understanding. If this resonates with you, I urge you, don't leave without subscribing to Truth from Beyond and hitting that notification bell. The journey is just beginning, and we have so much more to uncover together in this spiritual war for the truth. In our next video, we'll delve deeper into testimonies of awakening, hearing from those who have found freedom in their struggles. I'm Rashid, and I am grateful you joined me for this moment of revelation. Remember, the truth is a journey, not a destination, and it's waiting for each of us to embrace it. I felt the urgency to speak out, to challenge the silence that cloaked the truth. More than a story of confrontation, this is the beginning of a journey towards understanding, and we are all invited to this revelation. So as we step into this narrative together, I ask you, where are you watching from? What time is it in your corner of the world? Leave a comment below. Your story matters. And if your heart resonates with this message, subscribe now to Truth from Beyond. Join us as we uncover the layers of light breaking through the darkness, revealing truths that you were made to discover. I was never the kind of person to question my beliefs. Growing up in a world steeped in tradition, surrounded by the sound of prayers echoing through the streets of my bustling city, I lived my life fully devoted to the teachings of Islam. As a judge, my days were filled with weighing the moral complexities of people's lives, a semblance of power and control in a society where questioning the status quo could lead to dire consequences. But all that changed one fateful day, when an unexpected illness struck me down. In those dark moments, I felt my spirit leave my body, hovering above as I watched the frantic attempts of doctors trying to save me. The sterile smell of the hospital, filled with dread, became a mere backdrop to the unfolding reality beyond. Suddenly, I was enveloped in a warm, golden light. I felt suspended in a realm where time lost its meaning. And there, bathed in this radiant presence, I encountered Jesus. His face was a canvas of love and wisdom, eyes deep with understanding, penetrating right through the facade I had built around my heart. As I stood before him, words poured from his lips, not merely spoken, but resonating deep within my soul. "You're part of a spiritual war," he said, and in that moment, the truth of his statement unveiled itself before me. I witnessed scenes of unrest, division, and manipulation that stormed the very lands I cherished. The elite, those who clad themselves in power and influence, were driven by a hidden agenda that manipulated the masses, keeping them blind to the deception surrounding them. It was alarming to realize that the narratives we lived by were spun by hands that sought control rather than truth. Jesus revealed to me secrets about our society, how the roots of our divisions had been grown and nurtured by those who thrived on conflict and chaos. I saw leaders of nations whose glories were built on deception, their smiles hiding darkness underneath. The wars we faced weren't just fought on battlegrounds, they permeated our minds, and it was a war striving to capture souls. I felt the urgency in his voice, an invitation to awaken from the slumber brought on by ignorance. "The truth will set you free," he urged, revealing that so many had forgotten their true purpose, caught in the machinery of progress but losing the essence of their humanity. Floating in this ethereal space, I felt the weight of the world resting heavily on my shoulders, as an overwhelming sense of responsibility emerged. The clarity came with stark reality. The age we live in is not just a cycle of life, but a pivotal moment for our existence. The future of humanity hangs by a thread, influenced by an unseen hand guiding us into an abyss of despair masked as progress. I felt an urgency to shout this revelation to the world, to awaken those still lost in slumber, those gripping onto belief systems that no longer serve the truth. But like a dream fading at the break of dawn, my encounter with Jesus began to wane. Yet I could feel the embers of that moment, igniting a fire within me. As his light receded, I was drawn back to the reality where chaos reigns. I woke in the hospital bed, gasping for breath, my heart racing, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. I realized that the truths I had witnessed were but the beginning of a journey I had to embark on. The perilous struggle ahead was far from over. It was merely unfolding, and time was not on our side. Every day in the courtroom felt like a dance, where I was a puppet, manipulating the strings of morality for others. I'm Rashid, a 45-year-old Muslim judge, known for my fairness and integrity. Outwardly, my life seemed respectable, but inside, I grappled with a growing emptiness. I often felt isolated, lost in the complexities of tradition that seemed to conflate duty with purpose. I followed the rulings of the Quran meticulously, but the words began to feel like shackles rather than guidance. The spiritual war raging within me had reached a fever pitch, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. It was during one of those monotonous days, while reading through a routine case, that I began to feel a strange sensation. I placed the Quran aside and suddenly collapsed, my vision blurring as the room spun around me. As the blackness enveloped my consciousness, I felt a force pull me from my lifeless body, thrusting me into an unfamiliar realm. I was caught in the limbo between life and death, where time ached under the weight of eternity. It was then that I encountered Jesus. He stood before me, cloaked in light, his presence overwhelming yet profoundly comforting. "Rashid," he said, his voice echoing not merely in my ears but resonating deep within my very being. You stand on the threshold of revelation. As I gazed into his eyes, I was flooded with visions that peeled back the layers of deception surrounding our world. I saw the hidden agenda of the elite, the powerful puppeteers orchestrating chaos on earth while smirking behind their facades of authority. Wars fought in the name of righteousness, disguised an insidious drive for control and influence. The truth is, they thrive on our discord, capitalizing on our fears, spinning narratives that entangle society in a web of confusion and strife. He continued, unraveling the threads of our existence, showing how leaders across the globe perpetuate division, feeding on the weaknesses of humanity. I felt the urgency of the awakening he called for, an awakening to the truth that has long been suppressed by institutions willing to sacrifice integrity for power. The tension grew greater, and I was forced to confront the reality of my own complacency. You are a judge, he pointed out. Your role is not merely to uphold laws, but to shine light upon the truth. You're called to guide others, not just by tradition, but by awakening their hearts to the deception around them. In that surreal experience, I felt compelled to absorb every revelation. The impending darkness of our society was palpable, as was the hope that our spirits could rise against it. I saw glimpses of a future where people held hands in unity, discarding the barriers built by fear and manipulation, fighting together against the spiritual war. But the weight of knowledge I now carried felt heavy and burdensome. Jesus imparted a message of hope, but matched it with a stark reminder that time was slipping away. Every moment counts in this battle for souls. As I was thrust back into my body, the stark contrast of my reality hit me like a cold wave. Gasping for breath, enveloped in the sterile scent of the hospital, I understood that my life as a judge would never be the same. I clutched the fabric of my robe, knowing I had been marked with an awakening I could not ignore. The layers of deception had been peeled back, revealing the urgent call to share this truth. I rose from that hospital bed, ignited by a fire I hadn't known I possessed. The fight was just beginning, calling me to step into the light I now knew I was meant to protect. As I knelt on the prayer rug, the world around me faded into stillness, but the emptiness within me grew more pronounced. I'm Rashid, a 45-year-old judge committed to my faith. Yet in those quiet moments, doubts began to creep in. The words of the Quran that once brought me comfort now echoed like empty promises, leaving me unsettled. I questioned if I had truly understood their essence, or if I had merely become a pawn in a game governed by the elite who wield religion as a tool for control. It troubled me, the way belief could dictate the lives of those around me, often binding them tighter in chains of fear instead of liberation. I found myself living in a world where obedience outweighed understanding, where rituals overshadowed genuine connection. The spirit of my community seemed stifled, suffocated beneath the weight of expectation. Each day, I saw my fellow citizens tormented by the complexities of their own faith, wrestling with the perceived righteousness enforced by tradition. I felt like a ghost among them, silently grappling with my growing discomfort, yearning for something deeper, something real. With every prayer, my heart cried out for revelation, for truth. Then it happened. One ordinary day turned extraordinary as I succumbed to a sudden illness. My body weakened and consciousness slipped away, dragging me into darkness. In that surreal moment, I felt a presence, a force calling me forward into the light. And there, amid an indescribable warmth, I met Jesus. His face radiated love and understanding, piercing through my confusion, and filling the void that had haunted me. He spoke, and as he did, the weight of countless doubts fell away. "You yearn for awakening," he said, and in his words I felt the resonance of my deepest longing. What followed was an avalanche of revelations. Jesus unveiled the hidden agendas that twisted our world. A spiritual war not just fought on physical battlegrounds, but raging in the hearts and minds of humanity. I saw images of wars, families torn apart, communities shattered, all in the name of ideologies crafted by those who thrived on division. The elite stood behind the curtains, pulling strings to ensure that fear would reign, that ignorance would tether souls to their cages. Suddenly I understood why my heart felt so heavy. The fabric of our reality was stained with deception, dressed up as righteousness yet cloaked in darkness. With each truth he revealed, I felt the urgency intensify. I sensed that this wasn't just a personal awakening, it was a clarion call for all of humanity. "Rashid," he urged, "you must carry this truth back to your world, to those who are still in the shadows." I felt the weight of my responsibility pressing down on me, the realization that I had the power to impact lives if only I could share the light I had encountered. As the visions unfolded, I witnessed moments of unity from the ashes of despair, souls rebelling against the deceptions that had long ensnared them. I could feel the pulse of hope, yet I knew that hope alone wasn't enough. Action was required, a collective movement towards awakening. But just as quickly as the clarity came, the light began to pulse, and I felt myself being pulled back, reluctantly, into the confines of my earthly existence. I awoke in the hospital, gasping for breath, every detail of my encounter imprinted on my soul. My journey had transformed into an urgent mission, but I was left with more questions than answers. The truth was now intertwined with my being, but how could I convey it to those still lost in their routines, bound by fear and deception? My heart raced with the realization that this was only the beginning of a far more significant battle, a battle that would take everything I had to fight for the awakening of others. It was one of those ordinary nights where routines settled like a heavy fog, and life moved forward without any forewarning of the chaos that was about to unfold. I remember feeling the weight of my thoughts pressing against my temples as I drove home, replaying the events of the day in my mind. A simple case, a verdict, the faces of those who sought justice within the walls of my courtroom. Suddenly, without warning, the world around me turned into chaos. In an instant, headlights blinded me, and there was a blaring horn before a deafening crash echoed through my body. I felt everything go dark, enveloped in silence. The next thing I knew, I was lost in a void, suspended between life and death, a place where time had no rule. In that deep silence, I was drawn into an oppressive darkness, a suffocating weight that threatened to consume my very soul. It was a realm of confusion, where shadows whispered deceitful promises, tugging at my heart, reinforcing the emptiness I had grappled with before. Just when I thought despair would swallow me whole, a radiant light pierced through the darkness, illuminating everything around me, creating a stark contrast that felt both overwhelming and comforting. As I stood in the glow of that light, I heard a voice call my name, Rashid. The voice resonated with authority, yet was laced with compassion. It was Jesus. As he stepped into view, my heart felt like it was bursting with both fear and hope. His presence radiated peace, a stark juxtaposition to the turmoil that had just enveloped me. "You've long sought truth," he said, looking deep into my soul, exposing not just my fears but the doubts that festered inside me. The spiritual war raging beneath the surface of our existence flashed before my eyes. I felt the weight of the hidden agenda orchestrated by the elite, their relentless grip on society, manipulating faith for their gain while stifling the very essence of humanity. It was a revelation that struck me with the force of a tidal wave. His words painted a vivid picture of humanity in chains, blinded by the deception woven through religion and politics alike. I saw how wars were not merely the clash of weapons but battles for hearts and minds, with leaders pushing the masses to the extremes of division. The isolation I had endured in my faith became a mirror, reflecting the struggle faced by so many. Your people are in the dark, lost in beliefs that lead them away from truth, he prompted, shining a light on the realities I had only begun to comprehend. Slowly, I began to understand that the constructs around religion could be both a source of guidance and a cage that kept people from seeking the divine lives within. Jesus spoke of the awakening that was needed to transcend that darkness, a movement to challenge the oppressive structures upheld by fear and blind obedience. I watched visions of hope rise like phoenixes from despair, people standing united against the tide of manipulation, reclaiming their autonomy through love and understanding. For the first time, I felt the warmth of urgency in those revelations, an insistence that I could not return to my former life unchanged. I had been called to action, to break the silence that binds my community, to ignite the spark of awakening in those souls wandering aimlessly. But just as swiftly as the light enveloped me, it began to fade, pulling me back into the mundane world. I awoke in a hospital bed, each breath a reminder of the life that still existed, yet my heart was now ablaze with purpose. The journey ahead was daunting. I could almost feel the weight of the task ahead as my mind raced with what I had witnessed. The truths I encountered now throbbed in my veins, demanding to be shared, fighting against the tides of deception that surrounded me.